Welcome to Newscafe. I'm Mitzi Borromeo. Tonight, we're joined by veteran theater and film actress Monique Wilson. She is director of 1 Billion Rising, a worldwide movement to end violence against women. Monique, welcome to Newscafe.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. Now, it's been 2 years since you headed 1 Billion Rising. Tell us about this movement, how you got into it.
First of all, I don't head 1 Billion Rising.
You're the director, sorry. Global director.
Within the movement, yeah.
Right.
Well, it's been amazing. Like 1 Billion Rising, as you recall, last year was 1 Billion Rising for Justice.
Yeah.
That was our second year, and the first year was 1 Billion Rising. It was really a global call to end violence against women and girls. And in that first year, in 2013, we were so overwhelmed by the response of 207 countries and thousands of rising events all around the world, which really kind of indicated how committed people are to ending violence against women and girls and what they were going to do to engage and contribute to ending that. So that was really inspiring. So it became deeper in the second year in 2014 because then there was a theme, and the theme was justice. Because of the rampant impunity that's going on all around the world, which is escalating the violence. And so even more groups joined. And what we saw last year, or this year, was really that the grassroots led it. And there were really creative, audacious ways of expressing people's indignation and people's, intolerance already of the violence that's happening. So this year, it's already going to escalate again into another theme because it almost feels like an unstoppable energy.
Yeah.
Because, movements are like that. You don't know if they're going to last or they're going to continue. And it's really so determined by the people. And so I think that's what we saw this year is that there's a raging cry to really address this issue.
And a metaphor that you've used a lot for this is dance. This started all with it. There's a dance that, there's been flash mobs all around. And this symbolizes how the movement is, it's fired up and it's growing.
Because, 1 Billion Rising really was born out of the V-Day movement.
Yes.
And the V-Day movement was spearheaded by the playwright of the Vagina Monologues, Eve Ensler. So its core is always using art as activism.
Right.
And why art? Because art can really fire up people because it appeals to the emotions, it touches the heart. It's not an intellectual exercise.
Right.
And that's what we saw for many, many years with Vagina Monologues and V-Day.
Yes.
And when OBR was born out of that, 1 Billion Rising, it was very much the same energy. Like people responded to it viscerally, not intellectually. They responded with their emotions and with their spirits. And dance really became the catalyst to get people together. And in the first year, nobody anywhere asked it in the second year, but the first year everybody asked why dance? Why dance? You seem to be advocating a very serious issue when dance doesn't feel like a serious action. And all of us would say, first of all, when a woman is raped or battered or economically exploited, when she becomes hungry and is forced to sell her body and all the forms of violence that are done to her, it's her body that gets caged, right? So it's her body that gets oppressed. So dance is not just a symbolic, but a physical release of that engagement, that something that's caging and oppressing her. So survivors all around the world danced to really kind of gain their power back. But the second reason is also that dancing is alive. It's really a force and it's almost unstoppable. Like when people see it, it's like they feel drawn to it.
Yeah.
It's an amazing, and it's collective.
Right.
It's not something you just do individually. I think in this day and age now, we get so conditioned that it's very individualistic. It's me. But dance is such a collective action.
Universal
and in that
language.
collective energy, there's so much power there.
Yeah.
And really capacity to change things.
Yeah. And what Eve Ensler said about this, she said, we've all learned to be so well behaved and polite, we should be hysterical.
Yes,
She's saying about this
absolutely.
issue, we really should speak up.
Yes. And really what it needs to be is that we need to express that rage. Because I think our biggest enemy with social injustices is apathy. And I think when you express your rage about things, or your celebration of things, then you're alive and you're connected and you have the ability to then touch other people as well.
That's right.
So I think that's the space we have to be in.
Yeah, well, so much passion for this. No wonder you left your post in London. You were teaching
Yes.
for about 5 years when you had to leave to do this, to be here.
Yeah,
right?
well, I chose, teaching in London was like an amazing experience because, of course, my past is theater.
Yeah.
And it'll always live, of course, in the deepest part of my heart. But you really come to a point in your life, because I'm 44 years old now, and I've been doing theater since I was 9, so it's been a long journey.
Yeah.
And sometimes you feel like, okay, where do you want to bring this now? Where do you want to bring your experience? Where do you want to bring your skills that
Right.
you've acquired all these years? And how can it serve now? A much bigger thing than yourself. And teaching, though, international students for 5 years at E15 Acting School, which is quite a radical, revolutionary theater school, because our roots are very like radical theater as well. England is very known for that. It also taught me a lot, because when I was faced with like 35 international master's degree students every year for 5 years, that's like having the world in your classroom.
Yeah.
The learning was so deep, it was so rich, and it gave me a glimpse of humanity issues around the world,
Right.
because my students really represented that.
Yeah.
So I almost felt like that really prepared me for 1 Billion Rising too.
Well, we'll talk about more on that now. I just like to go back to your foray into theater. Now, you were acting since you were 9, but you first got introduced to theater at 3 when you watched the, what
Yes.
was it? The
Diary of Anne
Anne
Frank.
Yes. And your mother had to stop you from climbing into the stage.
I know.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. You have a very long memory.
was that?
It's a scary thing. When I was 3, because my mother was very much into the theater, Repertory Philippines, and her good friends were Zenaida Amador and Baby Barredo, and so we would watch every opening night. And the first show my mother brought me to was Diary of Anne Frank, and I remember, I don't remember the story, but I remember that I wanted to climb on the stage at the interval, but I did remember one thing. I just remember that it was about some injustice, something that didn't feel right. I guess when you're 3 years old, what possessed my mom to take me to Diary of Anne Frank at 3 years
That
old?
age.
That also kind of says something about my mom. She's pretty radical too. But I really fell in love with theater because I realized, oh my gosh, there's something live up there that we are now a part of, and that energy was just amazing. Of course, my mom had to peel me off the stage at the interval. And then very soon after that, not soon, but when I was 9, she then enrolled me and my siblings in theater workshops in Rep, and that's really where it started.
And you were discovered was at a birthday party you were singing. That's where you're discovered by Zenaida
Yes,
Amador
yes.
and Baby Barredo. And
Yes.
from there, all these leading roles came up for you.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for all my years in Repertory, because wow, what an amazing school it was.
Yeah.
Not just to learn theater, which we did, really hands-on, but also about life.
Yeah.
I was 9 years old when I did Annie with Leia. She was Annie. And I replaced one of the kids. I was in the workshop. Actually, Leia was my classmate. And then one of the kids in the original cast, because I wasn't in the show yet, got sick. So I replaced her. And of course, I was really excited. It was, when you're 9 years old, it's like a show is like a playground. It's the most amazing thing, and you just have so much fun. And then the thing is, what I felt though was that, as I got older, of course, it became a profession, but nothing was kept from us in that space, In many ways, I was really grateful for it. We were almost treated like adults.
Yeah.
The discussions we would have around issues of whatever stories we were telling on stage, we as children, we were engaged with that. And so the learning was so deep, and also the maturing was so huge.
Yeah.
It was so much more than what one would get in school. Like, say, for
That's
example,
true.
where it's kind of rigid, the kind of education is so structured and rigid. Here it was open. It was really like, in a way, very enriching, because you were just exposed to so many worlds and so many issues and stories from a very young age. And not just exposed, but you were like living it because you were acting it out on stage.
Quite a fast way to grow up that way.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah.
You were training with two of our great pillars of theater, Baby Barredo and Zenaida Amador.
Yes.
What were the biggest things you got from them? What do you think you really learned from them?
Well, the biggest thing I got from them was discipline. Discipline. They were unrelenting.
Yeah.
Didn't
They're
matter if
scary.
we were 9 years old.
Yeah.
You come on time, you know your lines, you've done your homework, you've done your work,
Right.
and you be good and you be professional. There was no mollycoddling because we were children, right? And I was really, really thankful for that. And they also threw a lot of challenges my way, because I think in a way they sensed that kaya ko naman, I could be up for that. Like, for example, Tita Bibat Amador, she said, okay, you're teaching us summer theater workshop for kids. When I was 14, Like I was
Oh my
14.
gosh,
Because I had taken workshops from 9 till I was 13. When I was 14, she said, okay, you're now going to be a teacher. Okay. So, like you just don't say no.
You just
don't-
take it.
You say, okay.
Yeah.
And then she assigned 52 children to me with no assistant. And from age 3 to 16, some were, they
Older
were
than
even
you.
older than me. So I faced resistance, in the classroom. I was like, but no, let's do this. And I had the most amazing time. I had the most amazing class. I remember I directed Alice in Wonderland. It was my first directing thing
Wow,
with students.
at
And I'm
14.
like, and I loved it. I totally loved it. So those kind of things I really owe to them because they just viewed you as somebody who had the ability.
Yeah.
They believed so much in us. So it really allowed us to spread our wings and fly and really jump into situations where I don't think other young people, would have been given those opportunities. And they were very strict.
Yes.
And they were very clear, with us. Like, if you want to make this a profession, this is not something you're going to play around with.
Yeah.
You commit. So I really
Right.
learned discipline, commitment, dedication, professionalism, and also to be sturdy.
Yeah.
They really told us the truth when we were not acting properly.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I don't believe you. You need to just take it. So we didn't become overly sensitive about criticism, or we didn't become overly sensitive about, like the truth. And I think that those are really important things because it's really, I felt when I went to Miss Saigon, all the way to when I did my master's in school in London, all the way when I put up New Voice Theatre Company, and all the way to 1 Billion Rising. That sturdiness,
That foundation.
that fierceness, that kind of like,
Yeah.
you just have to be strong. You have
Yeah.
to be strong.
Now let's talk about Miss Saigon, that confidence. So that's where that came from. At 18, you were in theater school. You were you were taking up theater in UP, and then that's when Cameron McIntosh came here for the
Yes.
auditions. What was that experience like? Now it's the 25th year, isn't it?
Yes,
25th
yes.
anniversary
Oh
of
my
Miss
gosh.
Saigon.
I know.
What was that experience
You know what
like?
it was? You know what? I think when you're 18 and you've been doing theater for 9 years, in my case, the dream was to really keep doing theater, and either on Broadway or the West End, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and I'm sure Leia will agree with me also with this, it wasn't even about playing a lead role. It was just about the experience of being in another setting, in a place where historically theater has existed there for so long.
Yeah.
And the experience of being able to learn from that was really huge. And I think when you're 18, when I was auditioning, certainly, like you try your best and you just do it, right? And in a way, I do remember my younger self just had no fears. In fact, now you already, because you're grown up now, you have more fears. And then now when I fear certain things, like I have to go back to my 18-year-old self who was so fierce and so fearless, right? And I just remember that Miss Saigon was such a big deal for us because it was such an opportunity to learn. So when we actually went to London, when we got taken, me and Leigh got taken,
Yeah.
we were dancing on the streets in London and we were just so excited. We couldn't wait to come home and share it with everyone. And when we actually flew back with 13 other Filipinos to rehearse, we had the time of our lives. I mean, we did. We had the time of our lives. And to me, what a dream that was,
Yeah,
19.
I'm going to ask you
when I
more
went,
about
yeah.
that dream because we need to take this quick break. When we return, we'll talk about Monique's new voice company and her life shuttling between Manila and London. This is Newscafe, and we have Monique Wilson at the table. All right, Monique, we were just talking about being in London. Now, after the West End life, you came back to the Philippines. That was about after 3 years. And then
Yes.
suddenly you got into film. In
Yes.
1 year, you did so many films.
Yes.
You had your own album. You got into TV. What
It
was
was a
that
culture
like?
shock. Culture shock. Because, my whole life I'd been in theater. In 3 years, I was in the West End with Miss Saigon. And there's a certain standard of working that you get used to in theater. It's very disciplined. It's very exact. And then when I forayed into local films here in the Philippines and TV, it was also an amazing year, I have to say. But it really opened my eyes to how difficult the industry is also like in the other mediums, right? But again, I learned so much, and I'm so grateful for all those earlier experiences, because again, it challenged me in a particular way. And I think also that's where, actually it began now probably also in Miss Saigon, like the seeds of activism were starting to grow, you know, because I guess when you're 18, 19, 20, you don't really have language for it. You don't have, because even when I was doing Miss Saigon, I was thinking, you know, a lot of people in England were telling me, no, you're too strong. You're playing Kim too strong as an Asian woman. I'm like, but Asian women are strong, you know, like
they stereotype.
So I fought for that, you know, and things like that. But of course, you don't see that as activism. You just see it as maybe you're just finding your voice, you know. So when I came back also here for films, the same thing was happening. Like, I guess there's inherent things in you that feel like this is a bit demeaning for women, or this is a bit, you know, not respectful to women. You know, just things like, okay, you have to wear bikinis in the film so that we see your body. I'm like, that doesn't feel right. You know, that doesn't feel right. Or basta you have a wet look, so we also see your body in the scene. I'm like, well, but it's not necessary for the story, you know. And I'm in no way prudish, but you kind of, I began to get a sense. You were very aware at that time. I began to get a sense that, you know, we need to kind of stick up for ourselves as female actresses, and that emerged slowly. But those years, of course, were very eye-opening for me, because I also saw particular challenges in those fields.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to mention some of the films, like Bad Boy 2. You were nominated for Philippine Star Awards as the best newcomer at the time.
Yeah.
Kapag Iginuhit ang Hatol ng Puso. So this is the Philippine Academy of the Philippines Best Supporting Actress awardee. Out of all the films, is there one that stands out for you particularly that you really
I think, you know, I really enjoyed doing Rizal with the late director Marilu Diaz-Abaya.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I had been with a lot of male directors who were all lovely and taught me a lot. They also taught me a lot. But I just felt, I don't know, I felt safer in the hands of a woman director. And I just felt that there was a healthy respect and consciousness about what women actresses go through.
Yeah.
And when I was doing Rizal, I played Maria Clara. She was very like, you know, she really got me into the process of, okay, this is what happens on a film set. You know, this is where the camera is going to be. So this is where it's going to be the angle. You know, she was so mindful that as women, we feel vulnerable in front of a camera because, you know, we're kind of just laid bare there. And I think Maria Clara was not even like a sexy role in any way. Whereas the previous roles that I was given were kind of sexy parts. I guess maybe people thought that since I was doing Miss Saigon in a bikini, that it's okay for you to wear a bikini all the time
put you in this box.
A film. And it's like, of course it isn't, because it kind of feels exploitative in a way, you know. But I really felt safe in her hands, and, you know, and I think she's a brilliant director, and I think that kind of revived my love for film as well, because there was really a moment where I felt I don't want to do films anymore. I'm always having to fight for my rights, like on the set. Like I don't want to take off my robe, I don't want to take off my clothes, you know. And I think for women to have to go through that all the time on a film set is really like pressurizing and very stressful, because it's like you should be in a safe environment also if you're an artist, especially if you're doing particular stories, you know. So I really give that to Direct Marilu, that she revived my love for film, and you know, because I was almost slowly turning away from it.
Do you think that in the Philippines, well, now it's happening all over the world, that women really do tend to be objectified in film, you know, and it's happening in media and magazines a lot.
Absolutely.
It's happening more now.
No doubt about it. Everywhere, not just the Philippines, it's everywhere in the world. Like a woman is so commodified, and she's sexualized also. She's fetishized. You know, it's like she's there as a product or an object of desire, you know, or beauty or sexuality. And not that that would be a bad thing, but if that's the only thing that you're selling her as, then there is something wrong with that commodification, because a woman is so much more than that. And that, you know, to box her or to commodify her leads to other things, you know, other forms of exploitation and abuse, as we see socially. You know, there's trafficking, there's prostitution, and there's so many other, but it all starts there, isn't it? Like when we pick up a magazine and how do we view this woman, right? And then we wonder why, you know, men or a patriarchal structure in our societies kind of treat her in a certain way. The church does the same thing. You know, it kind of, it's just such a hold on our view of women, when in fact, why should we emulate, you know, whatever the church has told us we need to be: pious, obedient, virginal. that's not anymore what a modern Filipina is, or a modern woman is.
That's why it's very important to be media literate, to also know what's being fed to us.
Yes,
and this is the beauty of the New Voice company. This is what you were trying to do with your company, to really, it wasn't just your ordinary theater company. It was a form of activism for you, wasn't it?
I think when I was growing up in repertory, I was so, I had so much fun doing the Rodgers and Hammerstein, musicals, the Neil Simon comedies. I learned so much from that too, right? But when I did Miss Saigon, that was a whole other space. But I think when I was in London, my social and political education there exposed me to so many different kinds of theater. And so my dream was to go back home and put up a theater company that was different from what I had experienced and different from what was going on here at that time. Now, of course, there's many, kind of progressive, radical theater groups, which is great. And basically, my dream for New Voice was to really do theater that was politically provocative and socially provocative, and to use theater as a means to awaken and inspire and educate and incite audiences to really think about their lives and, engage with social issues.
Right.
And it was very tough in the beginning because, of course, it's not
You were
commercial.
new.
It's not commercial. We were new. It was very radical, to do things like Angels in America.
Yeah, the vagina monologues in 2000.
Yes, absolutely. And vagina monologues came a bit later, but
Yeah.
all those had challenges, particularly vagina monologues, because I soon realized, that anything about women's sexuality was so taboo and people were so fearful of it. But it was such a mega hit, and year after year after year we did it, because then you see, that's what I also believed in as a producer or an artistic director, that we can't underestimate our audiences. So I never bought in those early years, some people telling me, the Filipino audience won't be able to understand that. So just produce this kind of show. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. I
agree.
totally believe in the Filipino. We
Yes.
have such capacity to understand things, to accept, and to also to appreciate many forms of theater and many forms of art. And why should we edit that or be biased about it? Just, let them decide whether they want. And we saw it with Vagina Monologues. We had no sponsors, we had no support, and yet the audiences were lining up each night. And that's real theater.
And you even translated it to Filipino.
Yes, and we took it all over the Philippines and to all our migrants.
Right, to other
abroad.
countries, because the New Voice company has become very successful in Asia. You've also been active in Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore. How would you compare the different cultures of theater here in Southeast Asia compared to the Philippines?
It's all very interesting, because when we brought, for example, Vagina Monologues to Singapore, it was actually here. See, we had no censorship here. Like, we did hear from some church quarters saying that this is immoral, but nobody will come and close you down, right? I mean, they might pick it outside, but they won't close you down.
Yeah.
But in Singapore, the government itself was like saying this might be blasphemous, and we're not going to give you a license to perform it.
Yeah.
So I had to really negotiate with the Arts Council there, saying that this is really a great play to empower women. But in the first year we did it in Singapore, they said, okay, 21 years old and above. And I'm like, 21? We have to empower the girls when they're younger. But it was a negotiation. I had to compromise. Second year it became 18. Third year became 16. Fourth year, 13-year-olds could watch na Vagina Monologues in Singapore. So you also have to do it slowly.
Yeah.
Japan was very tough for Vagina Monologues because
that? They don't really speak up
about women's issues. So that had different challenges. But, in artistic spaces, you also find like-minded, radical, artistic people who will also help you push your vision forward.
Right. And in, was it 2008 when you did the V-Day, that was in New Orleans?
Yeah, that was the 10th anniversary of V-Day.
10th anniversary, and that was amazing because there were 4 of you speaking in different languages, saying vagina in your language, and you were screaming. It was very liberating, it seemed. You were jumping on stage.
Yeah, because that monologue is really to reclaim all the negative connotations we've given to the word vagina, and it's and this is where theater is so powerful, and we saw it every year. We're still seeing it now with Vagina Monologue. It's like, it really allows people to express. It shatters all the taboos and the silence surrounding issues that we actually need to talk about. And it's really the self-empowerment that happens is so immense. I mean, that has been my journey.
Right.
I don't know if I was, of course, I look at myself as a child, and I'm sure I was pretty courageous and fierce, but not in certain ways. But producing and performing Vagina Monologues gave me courage in other ways.
Yeah.
That I could bring now to political spaces, to other spaces, to really kind of be vanguards of change in other places, even when it feels so scary. Because that personal empowerment as a woman that I got from the play is the fire that allows me the courage to go to new spaces and to really to risk.
Right.
Because I don't think you can be an artist who doesn't risk.
Right.
That's part of our job. We have to. And then of
Yeah.
course, if you blend activism with that, then you can bring your art into activism and risk in the same way that you did as an artist.
Right. Well, we'll look into other risks you've taken later on. Time to take another quick break. When we return, we'll talk about more milestones in Monique's very colorful life. Stay tuned. You're watching Newscafe as we get into the mind of Monique Wilson. All right, Monique, we were just talking about V-Day and all the offshoots that it's had. Another aspect of this was the male voice.
Yes.
So not to put up the men aside, no? A part of all of these movements with V-Day is also to bring the men into the discussion.
Yes, in 2003, when we did a V-Day in 2003, Eve Ensler, she had posed this thinking to us, if you're a girl, what would a future without violence look like? Right? So that's kind of what we women were thinking of. It's a question she gave us in that particular V-Day year. But for the man, this is the question she posed, what are your roots of violence? And what did that do to you? And what would you now want to change from that? Because I think in all our years of advocating for women's rights, it's a clear realization that happens that you cannot just empower the women, they speak up, they then know their rights, they then fight for it, when the issue that men are still doing violent actions is still existing.
Yeah.
So the consciousness changing has to happen in both, the empowerment for the women to not take the violence, but also for the men to address why they are prone to violence, why they feel it's normal to do it, or why they feel it's permissible to just hit a woman or to degrade her, right? So we had a very interesting V-Day production where, the men wrote their own monologue and then the women wrote their own monologue. And we got really inspired from that in New Voice. So with Rito Asilo, who wrote the play, The Male Voice, we also realized, why don't let's interview men and really ask that question, what have been your roots of violence? And what do you feel about it? And what would you like to change? And that came about. The play came about from that. It was very successful. Again, it was very... I think it's always scary to kind of open up those things because, somehow men don't want to talk about their emotions and to them it's a very different space also. But we had amazing actors who did it and who also risked, who also opened themselves up. And we also had, men who were willing to tell us their stories that we could then bring into a play. So I think those kind of initiatives we would still love to develop. And we very much dive into 1 Billion Rising now because we saw a lot of men rising all over the world. So this year we even have a Men Rising initiative already.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Very provocative indeed.
Yes.
Now, another provocative role you played was in the play My Name is Rachel Corrie. In 2010, that's how you celebrated your 30th year in theater.
Yes.
And you said this was really a very moving experience for you. Why?
When I was teaching in East 15 Acting School, I had a Palestinian student. And again, it's one of these issues that you read about Israel and Palestine all the time.
Yeah.
And then you kind of know there's a lot of injustice there, but you don't know a lot of the other layered stories and why the injustice is even happening. And the involvement of the U.S. and because they fund Israel. And when I had my student Bayan in my class, her name was Bayan, she just became such a human face to the story. She was a refugee. She had so many personal stories that, in an acting space, you share so much and you become really close. It's quite an intimate space and the trust is so deep. And she inspired me so much to really go further into, learning what those issues are because, I always feel with theater and with the world, especially with 1 Billion Rising now, I just feel like we cannot just stay with our issues. What are our issues in the Philippines, The Palestinian issue is our issue, The issues of human trafficking around the world are our issues. Why are we always separating? I think if you're a human being, you should be involved. It's your task to know, to get educated. So I went to Palestine and I was with Bayan, she took me around, and when you see firsthand the total apartheid scenario there of just the discrimination against a race of people, it's really heartbreaking, and the severe oppression. So I decided I must do My Name is Rachel Corrie, which is a play about this American young activist who goes to Gaza. She gets killed. She gets bulldozed by an Israeli, bulldozer, and it's about her life. She kept a diary, and I just feel like, again, I'm not a huge political activist, although probably I'm becoming more and more now. But I think in our spaces where we have experience like theater, it almost becomes an obligation and a responsibility to show those stories as much as we possibly can.
Right.
And everybody asked me when I did My Name is Rachel Corrie, like, why don't you just do a concert? It's your 30th anniversary. I'm like, no.
That's not you.
No, what's more burning now in your heart is like to tell these stories. And then they said, why Palestine? And then of course, you know what we realized? That we were part of the decision making in 1947 at the UN, like our Philippine president, and we abstained from
that.
So it's like, we
contributed.
Have a connection. We contribute. And now when we go to Jerusalem, for example, as pilgrims, because we're Christians and Catholics, and we go there just because of that and not see the oppression happening right there, then we become just as culpable as the perpetrators. So that to me, that's really a big belief of mine. That's why I think theater really has as we saw with Vagina Monologues, it has a capacity to change. Why? Because you are provoking people to think about an issue.
Exactly.
And we cannot underestimate that.
Now, in terms of even the women you admire, this is a characteristic you seem to look in for that. For example, Vanessa Redgrave, she's one of your heroines, you've said. She's also an activist. Why do you like her? What else is about her that you really like?
Again, when I go back to my childhood, I find many traces of, where I stand today. Because I loved Vanessa Redgrave and Jane Fonda in the film Julia. And I saw it when I was 7 years old. I mean, who watches the film? Again, my mother took me to see it. Like, who watches the film Julia about political activists?
You were molded at a
when
very
you're
young
like
age.
7 years old. And it wasn't maybe a coincidence that many years later, I met Vanessa Redgrave in London when I was doing Miss Saigon because, I was very audacious, I wrote her a letter. I was doing Miss Saigon. Down the road, she was doing a play in the West End.
Yeah.
And I said, dear Miss Redgrave, I'm such a big fan of yours because I really want to be a political activist and I want to be an actress like you and a political activist. When you're so young, it's like a 4-page letter. And she was like, she must have liked the letter, or she must have thought, who's this kid, right? And I said, I'm performing down the road from you in a musical Miss Saigon. And then you know what she did like a few weeks later? She invited me to do a fundraising concert for the International House of Orphans for her. So I met her, we worked together, and to me it was like a dream come true because it's like this woman who I had admired since a child. And you know what I love about her is because she really is not going to compromise her political beliefs for what she thinks her image as an actor is. And I think that's really fierceness. That's courage.
Because for a while she was actually put aside because of her
to relate it back to Israel, like when she won the Academy Award, she said something about Zionism and all of Hollywood blacklisted her.
That's
she couldn't work, and yet she's such an astounding actress that she never stopped working, even when she was blacklisted. Because you really cannot hide that kind of a light.
Exactly.
You cannot, and it was no coincidence. Also, I think that. Many years later, I also met Jane Fonda, who's our board member of V-Day.
Yes,
an esteemed, loved board member of ours at V-Day, we performed together in New Orleans in that same V-Day Vagina Monologue show, and who I've met on many, many occasions, who's now, a great friend, and, we work together in V-Day. And it's like, and I think some of these synergies and energies just really connect when I think your inner core or your inner beliefs, are in tangent with each other, I think.
Well, your life is proof that when you really want something and you work hard for it, things just happen.
Yes, I think so. I mean, you believe also when you believe strongly in particular things.
Exactly,
as well.
no fear. Now, in 2012, you also, actually, this is the time that you came out. This is when you spoke openly about being gay. And, a lot of people, when they see a beautiful woman come out, they say, sayang. You actually
crazy,
like a reaction.
I know.
And we seem to be more familiar here with the male aspect of being gay.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
That was the first year of 1 Billion Rising, right? And I remember that year I was doing King and I, the musical. and I was not yet the global director, but I was coordinating 1 Billion Rising here. And I was already many years in Gabriela. And at that moment, I just thought, you know what? How can we do 1 Billion Rising, encourage people to speak the truth, encourage them to stand up for who they were and, what they felt, when I myself had not ever come out. Not that I ever felt I needed to, I mean, I've been gay for a long, long, long time, and I was still am in a very long, committed relationship. But when in my early years in film and TV and theater, I also felt I didn't want to eclipse the political and social activism work in theater that I was doing, because my fear at that time was not that you would be out, but that nobody will talk about the issues of vagina monologues or whatever we're doing in theater, because they're only going to focus on your sexuality, which was kind of the norm. So I also felt, but I also never lied about it. Like when people would ask me or hint, I just would not say anything, but I also never denied, because I think to deny is also to not be truthful to yourself. I just felt very strongly that, this is a private life and this is the public, and the public life has to really come into its own first, especially when you're doing political work.
Yeah.
And in fairness to all the media, I have to say, they never intruded. Even the showbiz media, and it's their job to intrude. Like, they never did. They almost kind of felt that I was gay, but since I never denied it, I felt very much that they respected me, and then they never intruded. But in the first year of 1 Billion Rising, I thought, I'm going to say this, because actually, you look at that sector, I keep, all my life it's been in the women's movement, right? But the LGBT sector here, it's so marginalized.
That's right.
No rights. There's so many huge forms of discrimination there. And I just think, gosh, there's no, you as a gay person, why wouldn't you just be able to say, and to be able to speak up also about it?
You need a voice.
Yeah. And I was really glad I did. And you know what? All the press were said, we've always known, so it's not
really no big deal.
It's not a big deal. And I also thought, well, this is really a maturing already, also for society. It's a maturing also of the acceptance of it. But there's so much to do pa rin in that sector talaga. And I also felt that in OBR, 1 Billion Rising the first year, so many LGBT sectors rose.
Yeah.
They rose. And you know what they were telling me? Even prior to coming out, and more so when I came out, they said, you know what? We as a sector, we need to learn so much from the women's movement. Because the women's movement have paved the way in terms of activism. And we want to learn from that activism, because now we really have to also advocate for LGBT rights. Yeah. So it was such a loving process.
Yes.
And I didn't get any of, I think, what other people may have experienced, a certain backlash. Totally not at all. It was so not an issue, and I felt grateful for that too.
Yeah.
It didn't eclipse the work of 1 Billion Rising, and
well, still so many inspiring stories to share, but time for another break. When we come back, we'll talk about Monique's advocacies.
I am rising for every woman I love, all my sisters who know of the pain that stays and lingers after wounds have healed and the scars don't show. I am rising, we are rising in every corner of the earth. 1 billion people rising, and our voice will be heard. I am rising for every woman on earth who cries herself to sleep, who thinks she's been forgotten in the darkness where she weeps. My nights are not of slumber, for my sister's heart I hear, and I ask the wind to bring her a promise of a world without any fear. I am rising, we are rising in every corner of the earth. 1 billion people rising, and our song will be heard.
This is Newscafe, and we are talking to Monique Wilson. Right, Monique, we were just talking about very important milestones in your life. Now, also in 2012, you talked about your health. Now, you had blood cancer in, was it 2010 that you were diagnosed?
Yes.
And so much has happened. You said when you're faced with your mortality, your perspective on life just changed.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I still have it now. It's a chronic illness, blood cancer, but I'm very blessed to, have access to medicine and healthcare. Yeah. And this is really what also fuels my activism in so many ways, because you just, every day you're reminded, especially when you're facing a chronic illness, that you are privileged and you are so lucky, and the gratitude you have is so deep that you must look at what's outside.
Yeah.
And this is really what kind of fuels me in my activism, because it's like, I was given a second lease on life, definitely. Your perspective does change when you're facing a chronic illness, and you don't want to waste any more time. You don't want to waste time with things that don't matter anymore, or things that, like even now, like negative energy or people. I really walk away from it because I just feel like it's toxic. I don't want to be in those spaces because there's so much to do, so much you can contribute to society, and there's so many, like even our own kababayans, our own Filipinos. I mean, they have no access to any of these kind of things. They don't have such luxury or privilege, and yet they serve. They serve continuously, and that to me is the most humbling. And that's why to me, I follow in their example. I learn from them. They give me the political and social education, because to me, that's really what being alive is,
Right.
It's not even thinking of yourself, it's really serving. So to me, okay, some days, of course you have side effects and stuff, but, I'm not even going to complain about it, because it's like, I'm lucky. I'm really lucky.
Living life to the fullest. So inspiring. Now, you joined Gabriela. You are a director of international affairs of the Gabriela Women's Party. You have always said that you've been so inspired by these women. I mean, they have really brought you to tears.
Yes, my Gabriela sisters are, the life and heart of my soul. I really believe that. When in 99 they invited me to be the international spokesperson for the Purple Rose campaign against sex trafficking of Filipinas. And that really began my long relationship with them. That's why in 2000, when we did the Vagina Monologues, I also knew, as a theater actress and not so educated yet on women's issues, like I could not produce the play without them as partners, because they're the ones who've been doing the advocacy work for decades in this country, and they know the context. So we've had a 15-year partnership now with Vagina Monologues, V-Day, and with Gabriela. And of course now with 1 Billion Rising, they're really leading the campaigns nationally and internationally with our migrant groups. But also I feel that, they are such real people, fierce women, courageous, who, again, as I said earlier, just, they serve. They serve the people to its fullest capacity with absolutely no help from the government. I need to stress that. And in fact, it's the government sometimes that they have to go against. I mean, mostly because, a lot of our violence, as I myself have learned in all my years with Gabriela, and particularly with 1 Billion Rising, where Gabriela sisters have brought me to communities all around the country, that, a lot of the violence is state instigated. It's the neglect, the severe neglect from our government that really doesn't allow our women to thrive, that exploits them, that keeps them in hunger and abuse. So, we have to call the perpetrators. That's what Gabriela have taught me too. Like, we have to call the perpetrators out. Not because we're always wanting to go against the government. It's not about that, but because, we can't allow this kind of impunity to go on, because you're serving the people. You're not serving the government. It's the other way around. And you need to be with the people. That's why earlier, a Gabriela sister of mine said, you cannot lead movements. And to me, that was the best thing she told me. It's the most humbling reminder of who you are and what you're doing. Like she said to me, you cannot lead movements. You have to be inside it. You have to be with the people. You have to listen to them. You have to know their stories. And you can become, somebody who can then bring the stories on another platform through my art, for example. So that really has been a huge gift to me.
Yes. I mean, another example of this is you were also very active in Lila Pilipina. These are the comfort women, and until now they really have not received any kind of compensation.
No. And yet, and look at what our lolas, our comfort women lolas, what they're advocating now? It's not even for their rights anymore. It's for the rights of our young Filipinas who are getting sex trafficked. Right. You can imagine the generosity of that. Like, to no longer think of your own stories and advocacy. Now you just want to make sure there's a justice so that the younger women now don't get trafficked. And the trafficking that happens to our Filipinas is one of our worst, most endemic And and now with the coming in of the U.S. troops in this country, we have proliferation of brothels and prostitution and trafficking. So we have a lot of issues we need to address here that we need to stand with. That's why sometimes I tell my artist friends, you know what, we have a place also. Okay, we're not as good as as the other activists who really can mobilize and energize, people. But we can sing in rallies.
Yeah.
We can talk about it when we're facing the media. We can be in solidarity with the people, and that there's
use this medium.
You can still contribute. No, there are no small ways of contributing.
And this is why you use theater as empowerment.
Yes,
also, you do this with
definitely.
some migrant communities. How has the reception been like? Because you've worked not just with communities in the Philippines, but also in other countries.
It's been amazing because art is really such a catalyst. As we've seen with 1 Billion Rising, it's such a catalyst for awakening. And once somebody is awakened, there's no turning back. It's like what Rachel Corrie says in the play. Once you're awake, you can never go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what being alive to the world is.
Yeah. And you also once said, you talked about how we complain about the state of our government or country, but you always say, do not blame the people before us. The generation now has to do something about the problems.
Yes, because it's your future too. And I was telling you earlier that in 1 Billion Rising, the most astounding aspect of it last year was the youth rising all around the world.
Yeah.
Wow, it was phenomenal. I mean, that the women's groups are going to be in 1 Billion Rising and the women's movement, but the youth who came into the campaign so fiercely and radically artistic, creative, audacious, fearless, and the Philippines, wow. I still need to get my head around like the young people and their risings in this country and what they were rising for. They were rising for like social justice issues. They were rising for tuition fee hikes. They were rising to say no to prostitution to pay for tuition because apparently in so many, poorer communities, the girls are being sold their bodies just to pay tuition, just to be able to go to school. And so the young people of all classes were saying, no, education is a right, not a privilege. And they rose for that. And to me, it was so inspiring.
It's wonderful to see that the youth do have a voice and they're doing something about it.
And they're insisting on their future.
Exactly.
And they're energetic and loud about it. There's really hope. There's really hope.
Yes. And another issue you've also been very supportive of is the International Migrants Tribunal. So you were helping the Global Forum on Migration and Development also, as well as you were a judge recently at the Gawad Agong para sa Pamamahayag. So you've been working with indigenous people too.
Yeah, and I think 1 Billion Rising, I think what it's brought us is really connection to so many different movements.
Right.
Our indigenous people have so many issues here because land is being taken away from them. There's so much mining, large-scale mining going on, and they're getting displaced. And the general public don't know about these things, and I wouldn't know either until Gabriela took me to the communities. And for our migrants, for example, sometimes we hear our president saying, oh, when we have this X amount of migrants going abroad, that's a sign of success. He said that in his sauna, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, that's not a sign of success. Who Filipino wants to leave the country, be forced to migrate, and get exploited abroad in other labor practices as domestic workers and leave their family for years and not see their children grow up? That is not a sign of success. So, it's like we have to really rethink these kind of things that are being fed to us by both, the media and the government and really rise against it.
Yeah. You've done so much, Monique, and I can't help but, talking to you, see these parallelisms with Eve Ensler's life. So the playwright, she had cancer too.
Yes.
Such an inspired woman, activist. Yes. Now 34 years in theater, still doing so much. What is next for Monique Wilson? What are you looking at now?
Well, our next call now for 1 Billion Rising. My life now is 1 Billion Rising. I think it's such an amazing movement that I'm so again privileged to be, such a part of, and to have a global perspective of the risings that are happening around the world and to meet the most amazing activists. There are equivalents of Gabriela like in so many countries around the world, and that just kind of, on the one hand, you feel grief and sorrow and rage at all the injustices happening all around the world, mainly instigated by a lot of Western countries with their neoliberal policies that really affect the poorer developing countries. But on the one hand, you also see amazing activists both in the Western countries and in the global South countries who are devoting their lives to really changing the world for the oppressed and the poor communities around the world. So you kind of feel like you feel rage and joy and grief and sorrow on the one hand, and on the one hand you just feel such inspiration that you would never get anywhere. You would never get that kind of. No, it's not hopeless. So I I'm so excited for this year, which is, 1 Billion Rising. And our theme this year is revolution. Last year it was 1 Billion Rising for Justice. This year is 1 Billion Rising for Revolution. And how we came about that is that we gathered 35 of our 1 Billion Rising coordinators in Rome last April, to really kind of assess and analyze what the risings were. And what we really came up with as an analysis is that the grassroots are fiercely in the lead, because the most marginalized really suffer the most everywhere in the world, whether it's in the West or in the South. And what 1 Billion Rising did was really give us a global solidarity. That we could now work in our advocacies locally because we could feel strength with solidarity that's coming from around the world. And that was the beauty of 1 Billion Rising. And also harnessing our creativity for more radical actions to really further our advocacy, because the art is such a powerful tool. Weapon in a way, because it really opens people's minds. So when we say revolution, people ask me, what does that mean, revolution? You know what it really means? Globally, it means that it's a radical shift in consciousness. And when you say radical shift, that means you have to take in the urgency of the issues, which means we can no longer wait. We have justice calls of last year. Now, we are still going to demand our justice calls, but we need to find more radical, creative, audacious ways of changing people's mindsets. Because, it's that once people's mindsets are changed, they will actively join. And here in the Philippines, of course, our call for revolution is really system change. You can't have justice on particular issues, but the system has not changed. So, the other day we had our launch already for 1 Billion Rising, and Gabriela's leading it, but we have a whole task force group made up of our workers, our migrants, teachers, students, children's groups, and our call is really women rising against corruption. Because really what we're sussing out now is that unless you change the system that's governing us, you're never going to get justice for women, because it's the system that's keeping the violence in place.
Well, Monique, thank you for being so revolutionary and bringing it back.
Thank you.
You could have chosen to stay away. You were living in London, you were in Singapore, and now you've chosen to come back to give back and really help the country.
But thank you also for giving us the space to talk about these revolutionary actions, because, we all need to work hand in hand to make the revolution happen.
Well, wonderful having you, and hope to have you again.
Thank you.
And that's your Newscafe tonight. See you next Thursday for another delectable Mind Brew. Thank you again, Monique Wilson, for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
I'm Mitzi Borromeo. Thanks for watching. Have a good evening. Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Say, do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that we bring when tomorrow comes. Will you give all you can give so that our banners may advance? Some will fall and some will live. Will you stand up and take your chance? The blood of the martyrs will water our meadows and lands. Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Say, do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that we bring when tomorrow comes.